I'm Alicia.
And I'm Liam. We both have OCD. And instead of spiraling alone, we decided to turn our symptoms into a podcast. You're welcome.
Here, we overshare real stories, laugh through the anxiety, and talk to actual experts who can explain why your brain keeps asking, what if I accidentally marry my cousin?
Whether your thing is hand washing, mental rituals, or just silently panicking during normal conversations, congrats. You have found your people.
This is a safe place. Unless you're an intrusive thought, in which case, get in line, buddy. We're booked.
So grab a weighted blanket, cancel your plans for the 5th time, and let's dive in. This is the OCD Confessional.
And yes, we did check this recording 4 times before uploading it.
Welcome back, everybody, to the OCD Confessional. Today, we are joined by Lisa McCarty, writer, journalist, and mental health advocate who has spoken openly about infertility, pregnancy, postpartum mental health, caregiving, and the reality of living with anxiety and OCD in motherhood. We're really grateful that she is here to share her story and talk about how OCD has shown up in her life, especially during the perinatal and postpartum period and as a caregiver for her mother, and what she has learned along the way during those experiences. So, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
We like to start with a confession. That's kind of what we do here on the OCD Confessional. Something from your past, or it could be something that's still happening for you today that people might be able to relate to or find, if they don't have OCD, maybe find it a bit odd. Is there something that you want to confess today, Lisa?
Sure. So I was thinking about this. You mentioned this is how you open every episode, and I've been catching up on all your episodes, and I love your podcast. So I'm so glad to be here. One of the things that I still do, and that I think a lot of people probably could relate to, is when I'm making eggs in particular, or anything with raw meat, I find myself obsessively washing my hands. And I am not just talking like one time crack the egg and wash your hands. Like, I do it throughout the process. I was thinking about this yesterday, making lunch. I, take the eggs out, crack the egg on the counter, put it in the pan, and then go wash my hands. And then I have to wash my hands at least 3 to 4, maybe 5 times in a row. And then right before I eat, I have to do it again. So it's funny because we get in this practice with OCD related to this, you get in this practice of compulsion where you don't even know that you're doing it. You mentioned light switches for you.
Yep.
I showed that to my daughter the other night. We were kind of laughing about it, but at the same time, it is so humbling because it really stops you in your tracks when you think about it. So
Yeah.
I guess obsessively washing my hands. I definitely think a lot of my compulsions and obsessions are internal these days. So that's probably the only one that I can think of that's, still affects me on a daily basis. Just the obsession with, I guess you call it contamination OCD, like this idea, like, if I don't wash my hands, then maybe I'm going to get salmonella and then I'm going to end up at the ER, and you sort of spiral from there.
Is that one of the first compulsions that you noticed, or when did OCD first show up for you?
Sure. So I was probably around age 5 or 6. My parents divorced when I was really young. And so I had a lot of stomach aches and nervousness around my dad would come to pick me up, and I didn't want to go with him. And so I would get these stomach aches. And at the time, I thought I was just, a nervous kid, and like everybody had these kinds of things. But I do think, looking back, those stomach aches continued on, and then they turned into a lot of anxiety, like overthinking into high school and college. And then I started having panic attacks. And it was when I started having panic attacks in my mid 20s was when I realized maybe it was time to go talk to someone. So I started seeing a social worker, and I saw her for a while. And then she said at some point, I think it was after about a year, she was like, I think you need to see a specialist. And I was like, are you rejecting me? Did I do something wrong? Did I break the rules? Because, immediately in hindsight, looking back, I do think that was even my OCD overthinking the rejection. Did I say something wrong? Did I do something wrong? Always looking for something to be wrong. And so she set me up referred me to a specialist. And within one session, he said, "You have OCD." And I was like, "What is that?" I don't, in my mind, I was like, I'm not doing things over and over. What do you mean? Like, I thought that was just like something that, strange people had. Like I classified it in my head or like, you know, and at the time I thought, um, you know, maybe there was more to it. Maybe he didn't know the answer. But then as we continued our sessions and for about 6 years, I saw him and learned that he was in fact right, like 100%. And then all of these things in childhood started to make sense. All these behaviors that I had and all those stomach aches that I had, kind of all culminated into this, you know, resolution of like, wow, I've been like this my entire life and no one told me until now at my 30s. Crazy.
Yeah, that's so interesting because that was Alicia's in my experience as well. I wasn't diagnosed until my late 30s, Alicia in her early 40s. And so that is such a common experience for people with OCD. And then there's all the shame that builds up because you don't know what's wrong with you. You don't know that there's an answer to this and a treatment that can get you relief from it. You said that around 13, you ended up having to be a caregiver for your mother. And I wonder how OCD in retrospect showed up for you in that journey.
Yeah. So when I was 13, my mom there was an accident at work. And she had a traumatic brain injury and went to work that morning, as a normal mother, kissed me goodbye, drinking cereal from my cereal bowl and, the typical things that a 13-year-old would do. Went to school and came home and she was a different person.
Oh,
So
man.
I essentially, my parents divorced when I was really young. And I didn't, there was no extended family nearby or anything. So I became the caregiver and no one knew what was happening to me. No one knew what was happening to her. And essentially, I started to put all of her needs first. And I think it was probably at that moment that I started kind of suppressing all of my own anxiety and fear and worries, into myself because I thought there was no space for that. All I had to do was to take care of her and that if I did a good enough job, maybe she would be fine. But in hindsight, looking back, I do think that my OCD was presenting itself in many ways. Most of it was probably just overthinking. The very first thing that I thought when I saw her laying in bed, motionless in the dark and not responding to me, was she was going to die because ultimately when you have OCD and when you're a child and your brain hasn't completely developed at age 13, I think there are worst case scenarios for anyone in that situation.
Mhm.
But for me, I think that was probably the number one thing that in looking back, that probably was my OCD thinking the worst because that's all I could think.
Well, and it happened. You experienced something really traumatic, right? So that does, yeah.
Exactly. And I think, while any child in that situation would be afraid, I do think that sort of worst case scenario response has carried me through adulthood. It is
Mhm.
always when I was going through infertility for about 10 years after every single pregnancy. I had 4 pregnancy losses in a row in a year, the last year of treatment. And after, that, I think when I did finally get pregnant again, I kept thinking throughout that entire pregnancy that something would go wrong. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I do think that as my therapist said at the time, that your OCD is having a field day with us. You're really good at obsessing about things. And so, he kind of made light of it, trying to help me to understand myself better, that like my brain was working differently than many people in that situation. While many women have anxiety in infertility and after a loss, I think people with OCD do it even better. So it's really, really hard.
Yeah, it's hard on its own, and then you add the traumatic experiences just reassure your thinking, right? You're like, well, I
Yeah.
told you so. And
Exactly.
that similar situation happened with me and my mom. My mom is quadriplegic, and ever since her accident, I have lived in this bubble of, well, of course it could happen. Why wouldn't it? I experienced it firsthand. And so you go into every situation, especially really meaningful ones like pregnancy and having a baby, and you're becoming a mom for the first time. Of course, you're going to be scared shitless. I mean, you've already experienced some really hard stuff.
What exactly happened to your mother, and was she still able to function and go to work and do all that? Or what did the caregiving look like? And how do you think that played into your OCD?
So she was a teacher, and she was spotting a student doing a back walkover in class. She was a PE teacher, and instead of their leg going back, it went sideways and kicked her in the neck. And at the time, and she fell back. At the time, when they took her to the hospital, they thought it was a concussion. But she was completely incapacitated. She was not able to return to work. And essentially, days turned to months, and no one knew what was wrong with her. I became her everything. And Alicia, I know as a caregiver, you probably can relate to this, that, when you're young and you're in that situation, you do everything that you can to take care of them, but then you suppress your own needs in that. And so I think,
Mhm.
as far as the caregiving, I was doing everything a mother would in that situation. I was trying to get her to the bathroom. She was barely able to stand up at the beginning. She couldn't sit up in bed. I was propping her pillows, bringing her food, helping her do basic things that she was doing for me for the first 13 years of my life. And so I essentially became the parent, and she was the child in, a matter of hours. And that continued on for several years. She did eventually regain her independence and ability to function and walk, and to live independently. When I went off to college, she actually moved away with a partner, and started her own life. And that was the first time that I ever was sort of able to be to have freedom and to do what I wanted. And unfortunately, because I hadn't dealt with a lot of that emotional burden that I had taken on for so long, I started drinking and doing drugs and other things to suppress responding to, you know, that situation. And that actually began in high school and continued into college and beyond. It wasn't until those panic attacks started happening that I realized maybe I needed to make a new plan, because
Mhm.
I was like, I ended up in the ER after drinking you remember those energy drinks that were super popular years ago? Like, you would actually, maybe the kids are still doing it. I don't know what the cool thing is these days, but it was like Red Bull and vodka. And at the time for me, it was like I think it was like mid-20s, it was like Mountain Dew Amp with vodka,
Oh,
which is
oh,
like a terrible idea for someone with
man.
severe anxiety. I ended up in the ER because I started having a panic attack, and I actually thought I was having a heart attack,
Mhm.
because for anyone with OCD and severe anxiety, to introduce an energy drink to your body is like the worst possible scenario.
My
But I just remember the nurse's face when I was like, I think I'm having a heart attack. I can't breathe. I was like doubled over, clutching my chest, and I it was like a cross between feeling like I was going to throw up and like my chest was going to explode, and feeling like I was going to pass out. And she's like, "Sweetheart, you're not having a heart attack. You're having an anxiety attack. I'm going to get some Ativan." And I was like, "What is that?" but but it was kind of at that point on that I realized I needed to start kind of dealing with some of this stuff.
Okay, wait. Let's go back on the timeline here because I want to
Yeah.
figure out where we are. So How old were you when you were diagnosed with OCD, when you saw that specialist?
Sure, my early 30s. So around it was around the time that I had my first child, which is about 33.
Tell
So
us
with
a bit about what that perinatal OCD experience was like for you. Some of those thoughts that came up,
yeah,
and what you were doing in those moments to help if you were practicing ERP.
yeah. Um, so when I first started, I don't know that he called it perinatal OCD. I think I mean, in hindsight, it probably was. But I think I had been dealing with OCD for my entire life, but I just,
Yeah.
you know, it was overlooked, it was misdiagnosed. And then ultimately it took, that one specialist to know the answer, because he just dealt with it for so long that he knew exactly what he was looking for. Just like you wouldn't go to your you wouldn't go to a head doctor if you're having a foot problem.
Right.
No one told me when I was having, severe anxiety. First of all, I didn't talk about it to anyone because I just thought everybody had anxiety. And I also just, suppressed a lot of it down because I felt like I didn't want to burden other people with my problems. And unfortunately, that manifested itself in a lot of really bad relationships prior to meeting my husband. So codependency, drinking, doing drugs, everything I could to sort of outwardly outsource my problems to someone
Mhm.
else. Like, here, fix me. If they love me enough, maybe I'll get better. Or maybe if I just drink enough, it'll go away. And
Yeah.
then so I would say, as far as the intrusive thoughts and kind of how it manifested itself, beyond the panic attacks, it was when I was starting infertility, prior to having my daughter, my first child. It was just a lot of overthinking about what could go wrong. And anybody with OCD knows, well, for me, it was always thinking the worst case scenario of everything. Like, for example, what happens if this cycle fails? What are we going to do next? And so instead of dealing with it as it came with each failed IUI cycle, I was already planning ahead to the next thing, because I was worried that if I stood still and thought about it too long, that I would be overwhelmed, and I didn't even deal with it at all. Um, and so that went on for a while. I wasn't really, I was sort of talking about it in therapy, but sort of not. Like, I kind of, let's be honest, sometimes we in therapy, we even convince ourselves that we're fine. Like,
Mhm.
I probably was lying to myself in therapy for years. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah." He would be like, "Oh, so have you tried that new food that we talked about? Or have you tried talking to your husband about the thing that you were stressed about?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, I'm gonna do that next week." But really, like, it was just
Yeah.
dismissing my own, sort of like disassociation for so long, that I had lived in survival mode for so much of my life, for decades, that I got really good at it. And I think I was even disassociating at the beginning of therapy. Just
Mhm.
like, if I ignore it, if I suppress it, it'll go away, because that's what I've done my whole life. Um, and so I think when I started having pregnancy losses, um, was when things got especially bad, because it was like we had 4 pregnancy losses in a year, and after each one, I was still not dealing with it. Like, I was going to therapy and I was talking about it, but then I just wasn't dealing with it outside of therapy at all. Like, I think there's this meme that I saw recently. It was like, back on my shit. Like, you're in therapy and you're talking about it, you're doing the work. And then as soon as you walk out, you're like, default back to the other person, disassociation, because it's just easier that way.
Mhm.
Um, but it was the exposure therapy that helped me turn the corner. Not only because my therapist was a man, I think because for some reason I found it easier to open up, because it was like, yes, it's great to talk to other women about our problems, but sometimes when people call you out on your stuff, it's easier, because I really, like, my husband is just so real and so laid back. And I think my therapist at the time, he was like, tell me like what's really going on. Like I can see through the bullshit. Like let's have a real conversation. What are you avoiding? And I was like, well, I'm thinking about all the things that could go wrong with this pregnancy. And I'm thinking about the fact that, unfortunately, like you, I think, Alicia, you mentioned, we think about the worst case scenario and then it comes true. For me, that was the truth. I have always been the 1% of every situation. Like with my daughter, I had a postpartum hemorrhage. And so when I got pregnant again after those 4 losses, I thought I was going to die in childbirth. Like it's like TMI. But I said to my therapist, I have had nightmares about bleeding out on the table. And he's
Yeah.
like, but that's your OCD. Your OCD is doing a really good job about obsessing of all the things that could go wrong. I'm like, no, it's already happened. I
Yeah.
already did that. So it could happen again. And he's like, no. What he did in exposure therapy to help me turn that corner specifically around that fear was calling me out. And with exposure therapy, you have to face the fear. Ideally, you do it gradually. But in the session, I remember that particular moment. I said, I'm afraid that I'm going to bleed out on the table. And he said, what's the worst that could happen if that happens to you? And I was like, well, I'll be dead. And he said, okay. And what else? And I said, well, then my husband's going to be left to be a parent on his own with my newborn baby that I've been waiting for 4 years. And he said, okay, well, that's really not that big of a deal because you'll be dead and you won't know. And I was like, what? I was like, that's just not reassuring to me at all.
That's what I've always thought about situations. And I remember the first episode Liam and I did, and I was talking to Lisa about this. I was like, I always go to worst case scenario, but then I have to sit with that worst case scenario in my head, right? Like, I'll be dead. Okay. Well, I guess I'll be dead.
Yeah.
All right, you're moving on. And Liam was like, I don't think that that's the way that you should look at things. I'm like, no,
I'm
but
not saying that's the right way to do exposure.
but that's where I would go too. Is like you almost have to just accept that.
To get me to confront the worst fear and say, okay, if that happens, then what? And I was like, well, I guess that, and he's like, well, you'll be dead, so you won't know. And I'm like, okay, you're right. And I think for some reason, it almost like rationalized the fear a little bit. Like it brought it down for me and said, okay, maybe I just don't need to worry about that right now. And so what I started learning to do over that 6-year span of CBT and exposure therapy was learning to do that for myself, learning to check in and almost like hear his voice in my head in situations where I was spiraling and thinking the worst case scenario. And he would always say, you have a need to know. And I was like, yeah, because I have anxiety and I want to know what the outcome's going to be. And so then he said, right. So the key is you can't know the answer and you have to put yourself back in the present moment and say, right now, I'm okay. Right now, I'm alive and I'm not on the table and nothing is happening to me. And so I had to start doing that sort of same approach with, bringing my body and my mind back into the present moment. As sort of simple as that seems, it helped me to get out of the what if scenario and come back into the present moment to say, I can't control the outcome. I can't control the what if scenario, but I can control where I am right now, which is sitting in the chair talking to you and everything's okay. And I think that has been life-changing for me because it's given me that sort of control back into, the idea that we can change our response to our thoughts is a seriously empowering idea. And CBT was a gift because before that, all I did was spiral all the time.
One of my response prevention messages, one of my RPMs in therapy right now is, I'm not going to solve this right now. Right? Because exactly right that OCD is the doubt disorder. You want an answer. You want certainty. Certainty is almost never guaranteed in life. And so a
Yeah.
lot of the treatment for OCD and the path forward is being okay with uncertainty. So in that moment, your therapist with your uncertainty over, you know, potentially a postpartum hemorrhage was, you can't solve that right now. And you need to learn to sit with the
Yep.
discomfort of the
Yep.
possibility and then move on with your day and go, okay, let me get back to what's
Yep.
in front of me. But it
Yep.
takes so much practice. I mean, that's the thing
It
is
really
that
does.
I think a lot of times, especially for Americans, we want a quick fix. We want, hey, what do I need to take to solve this? What's the supplement I need to take? What's the tool I need to use? And all of those could be beneficial. But the real answer is that it takes a lot of time and a lot of work, and many times catching yourself in the moment. Okay, my thought is spiraling. What am I doing right now? Let me sit
Mhm.
with this discomfort and be okay with it and then move on.
Yeah.
But it's like training that is similar to trying to train your muscles to get stronger. It doesn't happen one day at the gym. You have to go for many months to get better.
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable. I had an episode yesterday where I was spiraling and Liam's like, "You gotta sit with this," and it was awful. It
Yeah.
was awful. My body went into fight or flight, and I was just in my house, there was no reason to feel, like, crazy,
Yeah.
worried, and I just was like I was panicking. I was full blown panicking, and I was like, "Okay, this is exactly what I need to do. I need to sit here with it, and it will be okay, and it will blow over," right? That feeling goes up, and it comes down, and then you're
Yeah.
like,
And
"Okay,
then you back after the moment passes and you're like, "What was I so upset about?"
what
Or
was
like,
that?"
"What was I
So
so."
freaking out, and I think that feeling starts to dissipate the more you practice it, right? And you start to get more confident and stronger and rely on yourself and your intuition and your own knowledge of the situation, which I think, man, it's tough, especially when you've lived with it your whole life and you've developed habits around the way that you think. And
Yeah.
like you, I was late, and like Liam, all of us here, I you almost have to rebuild a sense of identity outside of your OCD and figure out like, who am I without this worry? Who
Yeah. And I
who
think learning to trust yourself and, as you said, Liam, like learning to train your brain, it takes time. For me, just become now, when the intrusive thoughts come up now,
Mhm.
as I've gotten so good at that response, like I'm pulling, something out of the dishwasher and an intrusive thought goes through my mind. I know how to decide in that split second. That's an intrusive thought, and
Mhm.
I need to deal with it right now. It's not real.
Quick break. We'll be right back. But first, a word from our sponsor. The same distressing, unwanted thoughts keep playing over and over in your mind. The same rituals keep eating up your time, holding you back from enjoying your life. You've tried talk therapy before and spent session after session diving into those thoughts, trying to understand them, trying to fix them, but somehow they just get worse. And the shame piles on because you think, why isn't this working? What's wrong with me? If this sounds familiar, here's what you need to know. You're not the problem. You're experiencing something that a lot of people with OCD experience. Getting your life back is possible because OCD is highly treatable. It just requires a completely different approach than other mental health conditions. In fact, standard talk therapy often makes OCD worse because it encourages you to analyze those intrusive thoughts or try to replace them with positive ones. But with OCD, the more attention you give the thoughts, the stickier they become. That's where NoCD comes in. NoCD provides virtual therapy designed specifically for OCD. Every single one of their therapists is extensively trained in a type of therapy called ERP, or exposure and response prevention, which is the most effective treatment available for OCD. And they get the training from world-renowned OCD experts so they truly understand what you're dealing with, even the stuff that feels impossible to say out loud. In live face-to-face virtual sessions, your NoCD therapist will teach you how to take the power away from intrusive thoughts so you can live the life that you want to live. And between sessions, you'll be able to message your therapist anytime, join dozens of life support groups, and continue your progress with other expert-developed therapy tools. NoCD is also covered by insurance for over 138 million Americans, and their team makes it really simple to get started. Visit nocd.com and book a free 15-minute call. That's nocd.com to learn more and talk to someone who can help, because you deserve treatment that actually works for OCD.
While you were going through infertility, OCD, of course, showed up for you in terms of thinking through the worst case scenarios of that. Then you were worried that you were going to hemorrhage. once you had the baby, which of course is a miracle in that moment,
Yeah.
how did OCD show up for you then? Because I know when I was a first-time dad dealing with OCD, I was terrified of something happening to Everly, and that showed up in me staying up for hours and hours at night, checking on her in the crib, making sure her chest was breathing. I wonder if, you finally get this miracle baby after all of this infertility, and then all of a sudden, boom, here comes a new type of OCD that you hadn't dealt with
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, when my daughter was born, our first, we, like many new parents, but then also I think it was compounded with having OCD. Um, that first night home from the hospital, I remember rolling over and watching. I could not sleep. I was watching exactly what you described. I was watching her chest rising and falling, and I thought of all of the things that I had read up until that date about, God forbid, the child stops breathing in the middle of the night and sudden infant death syndrome. And then I'm Googling on the internet. And so I think it almost like took that anxiety of like the what if scenario to another level, because now I had this human being to take care of and to keep alive. And so it almost was like I was projecting all of my fears into that situation. Um, and my therapist used to say, your brain is really good at obsessing about things. And I didn't know if he was like making a joke or actually just telling me what it was, but I do think that it's true. It took me years to really understand that, because in that moment of new parenthood, my brain was obsessing about, all the things that I had read, but also like, what if I did something wrong? What if my husband did something wrong?
Yeah.
And then I felt controlling of like what he was doing with the baby. So then I felt, and I think it sort of can take over and consume you. And when you're in that state of where your thoughts are consuming, it's really hard to kind of calm your body down, because you're just, the heart starts racing, and the hands, for me, my hands go numb when I'm in that state of panic. Um, and it's really terrifying, when you feel like you have no control over what's happening. And so when I was very early parenthood with her, I was just starting therapy. And it was, I was just a couple of years in. And so I hadn't quite learned, that, as we said earlier, like it really takes a lot of training for your brain to be able to change that response to the trigger moment or that intrusive thought. And I had to keep reminding myself, like, right now, everything's okay. Right now, she's breathing. I can't control what's going to happen 5 minutes from now. And I think I had to kind of keep practicing that. And it became more, you know, obvious also as she started walking, because I was just like, as a new mother, of course, like I was anticipating, she's going to hit her head on something and then we're going to have to go to the ER. And then if we go to the ER, then we're going to have to spend 4 hours, like you literally play the whole scenario out in your mind, and saying it out loud, I feel like I sound like an insane person, but really, like, it plays, becoming a new parent, especially after years of trying, was extremely trying on my anxiety, because I had to like relearn the same things again, but in a new way. Like I had to apply it to something completely new.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so tough
So hard.
because, to some extent, parental anxiety is really useful. It's really
Sure.
productive. It
Sure.
is a
Protecting them.
biological mechanism that is going to create fight or flight when the tiger comes into the cave and tries to get your baby. And you're going to think through all the things that could go wrong and prevent those things from happening. So it's useful to some extent. And it becomes very tough to distinguish, okay, what's a useful fear and anxiety that I'm having right now that is going to help me protect my child? And what is OCD? And trusting yourself to make that distinction. Where are you with that?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's really does take practice, just like it does in therapy, with training your brain to respond to things differently, but also compartmentalizing and delineating between is this an intrusive thought or is this real? Are they really in danger? Like, for example, when a kid at school pushed my daughter down in front of me, she was like, I don't know, 6 years old. And I remember I approached the other parent and I was like, are we gonna, do something about this? And all I kept thinking in my mind was like, this kid was gonna be the bully and this kid was gonna, cause my kid a lot of problems.
Mhm.
And what actually happened was the parent was like, "We should just let them work it out." And I was like, "They're like 5. We don't know, what do you mean?" But my anxiety and sort of need to control that situation was sort of taking over. And I think what I had to check myself on in that moment as the parent with anxiety was my kid is not really in danger. This is a typical problem that all parents probably have to deal with at some point in their, parenthood, especially early on, and deciding like when is it really worth it to like make things
Yeah.
a bigger deal and like when is it worth it to sort of just let it go. And I had to really practice at letting things go and
Mhm.
not the relationship with the other parent, but per se my anxiety of the situation.
Yeah, and letting the experience of those unfold as they would, and then that's the positive reassurance we need, right? To then
Yeah.
create the confidence if that were to happen again, or if this were to come up, "Oh, we went down that road. My worst case did not happen. My worst
Yeah.
case scenario," it
Yeah.
and that's, building the confidence as a parent. I run into that issue, and I know that you probably do too as well, with a preteen, a teenager, of understanding and trusting what is an appropriate amount of freedom at this age. Because
Yeah.
I'm scared shitless with everything that he does. He rode his
Sure.
bike this morning to school, and I thought, he's going to get hit by a car. He's going to die, and I picture him laying there needing me, and I stop, and I'm like, "Oh gosh, it's okay. It's okay. He's
Yeah.
gonna be fine. I know there's and I start to, like, to remind myself of the safety and all the positive things that are gonna get him there safely. But
Yes.
it's a lot of work to talk yourself out of spiraling and giving yourself severe anxiety over situations. So, how do
Yeah.
you feel like you deal with that today with a 13-year-old girl who also has OCD?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I do think about the same thing. She walks, to what actually she just walks home from school. I drop her at school, but when I think about that, she walks alone home from school. It's in the middle of the afternoon, so it's a perfectly safe neighborhood and a safe time of day. But I do think about that. I think about worst case scenario, like you see stuff in the news, God forbid, a van stops and picks her up, and
Yeah.
and in this world that we're in right now, those worst case scenarios, unfortunately, have become real for other people. And it is, as much as we can't keep them in a bubble, we also have to manage our own and not project our own anxiety onto our kids. So I think I've given her the right amount of independence, if you will. Like I trust her to walk home. She texts me when she's leaving school. I know approximately how long it takes to walk home. And we have a tracker on her phone. So like, find my phone app or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe that's overboard, but I think it's important to find that level of independence as a parent with anxiety
Mhm.
um, to your comfort, whatever that comfort is that doesn't feel like you are taking away their freedom and independence, but to the point where it shows that you are challenging yourself. You said earlier, Liam, about like it's important to sit with our discomfort sometimes, especially with OCD. And I think that is applicable to parenting as well. And unfortunately, all of this training and therapy, if you will, that I've gone through and the writing that I'm doing about it now um, is helping me because my daughter was just diagnosed with OCD. And I knew the symptoms before her therapist even did because she wasn't a specialist. And I started recognizing signs of myself in her. And
Mhm.
it's so interesting how once you've gone through the therapy, you can see it in other people, which
Mm.
has been actually a gift for me because I've stopped kind of worrying about like, how, well, I don't know if you guys do this, but if you're talking to someone, you watch their face, their expressions when they're talking to you. Even just, our conversation right now, you're like, what are they thinking? Are they judging me right now? Like, did I do something wrong? Or are they upset with me? That OCD,
That
the
hypervigilance
overthinking
awareness.
spirals, and I see it in other people and I see it in my daughter. And thankfully we identified it. And I will say, if I had had the therapy that I did as an adult at her age,
Yes.
I feel like it would have been so helpful. And what I am seeing, because she is doing therapy with a specialist as well as her regular therapist, it's helping her.
I wonder about that parenting because obviously that's a concern for both Liam and myself.
Yeah.
Will our child also have that? And you obviously want to protect them and hope that they don't, of course.
Right.
I'm curious though, since you now know that your daughter does have OCD, how does that trigger your own? And does yours almost get amplified, or are you able to, or do you feel like it's helped you?
Yeah. Well, I probably both.
Yeah.
Because, I think when we see someone else anxious, obviously when it's our own, little human being, we feel like we want to keep them in a bubble and we want to protect them and we want to, prevent them feeling uncomfortable in any way in their life.
Right.
Clearly, that's totally unrealistic as a parent. And my therapist used to say, they're not robots. We can't program them as much as we want to, because
Yeah.
that has been something, as someone who's a control freak, I ultimately I want to do everything I can to help her to be successful in life and to be a good human being and all of those things. But anxiety is not something we can control ourselves or other people, but we
Okay.
can learn that response. So I think it has helped me to help her better. I do check-ins with her every day when she gets home. And I try to not press for information because I don't want to create more anxiety in her or create an opportunity for rumination. But I do kind of check in. I'm just like, how was your day? And I just pause and I sit quietly. And it's very hard for me as a parent, especially with anxiety and OCD, to not fill the space and fill that silence because I'm like, oh, did you do this? And did you do this? And, trying to fill the conversation. And unfortunately, that hasn't worked well in the past. And so I've learned to just ask the question and sit quietly and wait for the answer. And as challenging and uncomfortable as that is, because I just want to know the answer and I want to fix it for her, I have to sit and silence and sort of be patient. And it's really helped us in our communication. So,
How do you find you're talking to her about the fears that come up for her? Because,
yeah.
Our youngest, my son, has shown some little signs of anxiety and OCD. Certainly nothing that I'm too worried about yet, but little signs of it here and there. And I have found my experience with OCD to be super helpful to him and how I help him navigate it. Because what a typical parent would do is your kid comes to you with a fear.
Sure.
Let's say they're scared of the dark. And that's a really typical fear, but for them, it's become disabling and they're performing certain rituals in order to prevent the fear or whatever. So he'll come to me with something and the typical response would be, "You're fine. You're gonna be okay.
Yep.
Here's evidence of why you're gonna be okay," and give him all the reasons he's gonna be okay. But actually, with a child with OCD, you shouldn't be doing that. You're reinforcing the OCD and you are accommodating it and reassuring that person. And I'm just curious how your experience with OCD has informed how you approach it with your daughter, where it's not
Yeah.
so much reassurance, it's more like, helping her to navigate it, confront it without it totally taking over her day.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Well, I think it's kind of done two things. First, it's helped me to change my response to her when she comes to me instead of doing what I I feel like most parents and I did. I sort of before I knew she had OCD and I thought it was just anxiety. I did that reassurance. I was sort of like, "Oh, everything will be fine. You don't worry about it." But then after I started talking to her therapist about it, And I said, she's coming to me with some of these intrusive thoughts that feel really alarming to me as a parent. And I've never heard this before from her. It's very out of her character and it's concerning to me. How do I support her, but not dismiss those thoughts? Because that was kind of the changing point, because I used to say, it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. We're going to figure it out. And I think that we're going to figure it out is still relevant. But I changed my response now when she comes to me with thoughts to say, um, tell me more about the thought. What is scaring you? Just like my therapist would have done for me.
Uh-huh.
And what is the worst that could happen in that situation? So I'm trying in my own way to apply what I've learned in my exposure therapy, where my therapist was challenging me to gradually face my fears, to
Mhm.
gradually, address whatever I was avoiding. And so I kind of do that with her in a safe space. And I say, I always open with whatever you're going to share with me. I'm not going to get upset. I'm not going to, judge you. And I'm not going to, call somebody and say, you're in trouble. I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to listen. This is a safe space. You can tell me whatever it is. And I'm still going to love you no matter what it is. And we're going to figure it out. And so she will share it with me, and she's gotten much better of revealing what the thought is, because it's taken her a really long time to be able to even say it out loud. For a while, she had to write it down. And so now when she comes to me with those thoughts, we have a process of, she's supposed to do kind of a couple things, like writing down, is she safe or is she in danger? And kind of trying to rationalize that fear. And then also, is it an intrusive thought or is it real? And I think now that we have this process and she knows that I'm a safe space of someone to talk to that isn't going to judge her or dismiss her thoughts,
Mhm.
she knows that, we can have an open conversation, and she's coming to me more. But she's also starting to write things down on her own. She's starting to change her own response to the situation, where she doesn't feel like she has to default to me to fix it, which I think is the key in any kind of parenting situation. Is we just, as parents, we just want to give our kids, the tools to be able to problem solve. And it is really hard as a parent with OCD to see her struggle, because I want to fix it.
Yeah.
But without those tools, she won't be able to fix it for herself.
Yeah, you can really empathize with how uncomfortable she might be feeling in those moments. It
Yeah.
is hard. I think words are so powerful, and what you're doing is incredible for her. Also too, at that same time, reminding her what she could be doing, you're also reminding yourself. So you're
Yeah.
learning alongside her is
Yeah.
empowering.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Where do you stand with OCD today? How are you doing in your
Yeah.
recovery? What would you, if you had to give yourself a 0 to 10, 0, there's no OCD, 10, you're, heading off to the institution. Where would you
Yeah.
stand at this point?
Well, hopefully not the last part, but I think, I was in therapy for about 6 years. And then my therapist retired about 4 years ago. And at that time, he said to me, you don't need me anymore. Like, you've done the work and you know what to do, and you're fully capable of doing this on your own. And at that time, I was honestly terrified, because I was like, now I'm not going to have you to talk to every 2 weeks. What do you mean? Like my husband's going to think I'm insane. But really, like, it actually empowered me to do it on my own, and to start, like, to stop avoiding some of the things I had been avoiding, applying all of the things that I had learned over that time in real life. And I started doing it, and I started writing about it, and I started sharing it with other people. And I realized, this is really honestly my first conversation about OCD openly in a public way. So I feel, more vulnerable about that, but I do feel like it's a safe space. And so I feel like I've reached a point where I am now, where I'm able to talk about it. It doesn't feel triggering to me like it did years ago.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that sharing my story and my experiences and the things that I've learned will help other people struggle less than I did, because ultimately that's the goal, is I know your podcast has done that for many people, and I'm hoping that my writing and sharing my stories will do the same. I will say I do still default in some situations to OCD tendencies, overthinking conversations, replaying them after I leave any social events. Like, why did I overshare again? Regretting that. But I think I have also come a long way. And I think, as someone with, OCD and anxiety and, a child now with it, I have to recognize the progress that I've made. And I feel like there's always going to be moments where you have setbacks, where you sort of default to it.
Mhm.
And OCD will sort of always be a part of who I am. And I recognize that. And I think when we can kind of come, and I feel like you've mentioned this before, Liam, like come to a place of acceptance and recognizing that it's like a part of you, even when you don't want it to be, when you want to just shut it off and turn off those intrusive thoughts. Um, I think embracing it a little bit more has allowed me to like not feel so afraid of it, and sharing my story. So
I love that, and speaking up is so healing, and your story will reach others, no doubt. So, what would you say to a parent experiencing scary, intrusive thoughts right now?
So I would say, as parents, we're all just doing the best that we can on a daily basis to just get through the day and keep our children alive. Let's be honest. Like, we want to put them all in a bubble and we want to keep them safe, especially in the current world that we're living in. And it's really, really hard. So I would say, number one, like limit your news intake because as parents, the more, especially with OCD,
Mhm.
the more that you allow sort of that external outsource of information, or you're consuming more news than you are allowing yourself to sit still and like be quiet with yourself for a little while, the more that you can feel overwhelmed. And so, as a parent with OCD, I would say that's my number one thing is like, I only check news like once a day. I do it in the morning
Same.
and then I kind of turn it off for a couple of hours. I have unfortunately, in the last several months, gotten in a habit of looking before I go to bed. And I do think that's impacting my anxiety level before I go to sleep. It's impacting sleep. So limit your news intake once a day. That would be my best advice. Number two is like, check in with your kids, but don't look for things to be wrong. Because as someone with OCD, I would say we are always looking for things to be wrong.
Mhm.
And if we look for, and I feel like I saw this in an interview with Amanda Seyfried recently, who is, she's an actress and has been openly talking about OCD the last few years. And she mentioned, like, if you are looking for things to be wrong, you'll always find it.
Hmm.
And so, unfortunately, I think as a parent, that works against us. So, genuinely, like, check in with your kid, but like, don't look for things to be wrong. Like, just let them be, the age that they are, and like, try to be present in the present moment, and
Mhm.
don't think about the worst case scenario all the time. It's really hard.
It is.
And then the last thing, I guess, is to just like give yourself some grace because you're doing the best that you can. And whatever that looks like, it's enough.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of practicing grace for ourselves, especially.
Yeah.
Lisa, this has been awesome. Where can people find your writings and more of your work?
Sure. You can follow me on Instagram. It's LB McCarty 717, which is my wedding date. And it just kind of stuck. So you can follow me there and you can find all my work on Linktree on my website.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you said that this was the first time you openly talked about your OCD, so I'm grateful for that.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the OCD Confessional. Be sure to follow this show so you get new episodes. You can subscribe to us on YouTube or find us on Instagram and TikTok at the OCD Confessional.